In today's video, we're going to focus on the Pi cycle top indicator to better understand where could Bitcoin peak in its bull cycle, and we'll be looking at this crossover in a lot of detail to better understand when could we peak. So let's dive into it. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Like this video if you enjoy content like this going forward, and let's dive right into it. So it's time for another Pi cycle update, and when we started doing this a few weeks back, we saw that if we propagate these two moving averages into the future for a potential crossover, that crossover would occur in January 2027. So really important to just highlight here how, because of this deep price discovery correction, these moving averages widened quite considerably away from one another. But because Bitcoin has rallied in recent time, quite a breakout in fact, we've been pulling up these moving averages, and the crossover as a result has been getting closer and closer into the future. So January 20th, 2027, as time went on, I've been just taking pictures, screenshots of this crossover as it's getting closer and closer. It was January 10th, maybe a day later or so. And now, as time has been going on and price has been rallying, we've been seeing that this crossover has now come back into 2026. And in fact, right now, at the present day, this crossover is going to occur November 2026. And in fact, really important to just understand that this crossover is going to get closer and closer to the future as we continue to rally. And in fact, if we're looking at this sideways period right now, altcoins are increasing in their valuations. So Bitcoin actually holding at the highs is still going to be bringing back this crossover even closer. And we've been seeing that these changes have been taking place at 10 days at a time. So every passing day or two, the crossover becomes closer by 20 days, maybe even a month. So we actually saw the acceleration in how quickly this crossover is getting closer into the future. Because in the beginning, when we broke out, that was the beginning of the uptrend. And so this rate of change was 20 days. Or at least 10 days at a time, and then slowly 20 days, and now an entire month. So the acceleration in how quickly this crossover is coming closer and closer to the future just showcases that really, before the cycle is done, we're going to have this crossover in 2025. Things are going to play out in a way that the crossover is no longer going to be end of 2026. It's going to probably be in 2025, and we just need to see price consolidate, rally, maybe even pull back just a little bit, and that's going to be a crossover that still is brought into the future. Because this entire price discovery correction, this period of underperformance, that's all over. We've been uptrending for the most part since then. And the thing about price action is that it tends to underperform, and then it overperforms. Then it underperforms again, and then pushes the crossover back into the future, or at least a very, very distant future. And then when we overperform it, it brings it close into the future. So we're going to be, in these next 2, 3, maybe even 4 months, we're going to be seeing more periods of overperformance than underperformance. And in fact, the periods of underperformance won't be this extended, won't take as much time. They might be still the same depth. So here we saw a 30% pullback, 32% to be exact. And that took quite a few months. But the thing about bull market pullbacks later on in the cycle, near the bull market peak, these pullbacks tend to be the same. So they can be 25%, 30%, 32%, 35% deep, but they take place over a much shorter time. And as a result, we're not going to see long extended periods of underperformance, which is why that's not really going to push this crossover into the future. We're going to have more opportunities to bring it closer to the future, meaning that we're probably going to get into 2025. At this rate, this could be a matter of weeks before we see the crossover get into 2025. Now, we've been talking about timing because timing is a really important part of this, but if we look at the crossover and the price point at which it crosses over, you can see that the green moving average is around 400k, and the orange moving average at that point in time is 400k as well. And it's these values effectively right over here. You can see how the crossover is getting closer and closer in time. And at the same time, the price point at which this crossover occurs is starting to drastically diminish. So back here when we had this 400k crossover for January 2027. Now we're seeing that at 385k, and this is going to diminish more and more. And speaking of these sort of, not even crossovers, but the moving averages themselves, in the past we've seen Bitcoin overextend the green moving average. 2019, we saw it reject from the green moving average. This was a very different moment in the cycle. Generally, we tend to overextend this green moving average, and that's been the case for most cycles back in the past here. But those overextensions, as we are starting to see, they're getting more diminished. In fact, if we look back here, that's a massive overextension beyond the green moving average, and it happens again. However, is that the same sort of magnitude? Just notice how already here we were seeing in the same cycle of 2013, 2014-ish, this overextension beyond the green moving average, we already saw a diminishing in that same cycle. So if we come here, for example, not too much diminishing, in fact, if we really think about it, if we measure it from here, not too much diminishing, in fact, quite similar, but obviously we're seeing that change here. So I think one way to think about this is that if we had two overextensions, slight diminishing here, I think these are two overextensions that could be jumbled together. So if we're going to jumble this and this together, then it kind of gives us this sort of overextension. So if we compare that to this overextension overall, then this is much smaller. But if we compare the single overextension to effectively that 2017 one, then it's the roughly the same thing. But it's clear that these overextensions are effectively diminishing here, and that second top here, that doesn't even get us beyond that green moving average. And so going forward, that green moving average around this time here, July 20th, 23rd, that green moving average, we need to rally 176 to 176k within the next few days to get towards that green moving average and to try and overextend beyond it. But the thing about that green moving average is that, well, it's going to continue representing higher and higher prices as time goes on, and so it's going to get less and less likely that we rally to that green moving average. So it just showcases how maybe we have to be a little bit skeptical about that green moving average getting tagged here. We saw this delicate overextension in the previous cycle, and then we missed it altogether. So perhaps we get another miss of that green moving average overall. And so that's probably what I think about the topic of the green moving average. And when it comes to the crossover itself, I think it's something we can also be skeptical about occurring as per what we've seen here in the past. So the way I'd think about this crossover is that, of course, it's important to try and time it, but I think that there is a very legitimate chance of maybe these moving averages converging as close to each other as humanly possible without actually Bitcoin seeing a crossover in these moving averages to trigger that bull market peak in the pi cycle. Always it's better to look at indicators on how they can fail, because a lot of the time, by waiting for history to repeat itself in this way, overextension beyond the green moving average, the crossover happening picture perfect just like in previous cycles, that might mean that we will hold a little bit too long and round trip the gains, because those things might not happen. And so what I'm just saying here in a nutshell is to effectively watch out for price to get as close to the green moving average, but probably missing it, to see the moving averages get as close as possible, but potentially missing each other in the crossover. And so if we get to a point where these moving averages aren't too far away from one another, I think that's going to be a really important time to be quite critical of where we are in the cycle. If, for example, we get this propagated crossover come into, for example, November 2025, maybe even January 2026, at that point in time, let's say we're in August, for example, And if we're in August or September and the crossover is saying that we're going to be crossing over in January, then with a bit more time, that crossover might come into December. And if we're in September at that time, then it's really important to see how far away from one another are these moving averages. And if they're quite close to one another, really important to be critical and also at the same time maybe a little bit skeptical of these moving averages crossing over, because we're not waiting for history to repeat picture perfect, although that could happen. What's always good is to look at ways how history can fail, but perhaps most importantly, how history can rhyme. So maybe we don't get a picture perfect repeat. If that indeed happens, then it'll be very, very easy for us, because if a crossover happens, then we know that within a few days we'll see a price peak. But is our markets that easy? Most of the time, markets just trick us out of our positions, find and design ways to make us make a emotional decision, sell too early, hold for too long, sell too late, and end up effectively round tripping the gains. So really important to be a bit skeptical and watching out for history, maybe not to repeat, but for it to rhyme effectively. And this is we've been looking at the price cycle for quite a while, and this is among the many indicators and metrics that we look into in the Rekt Capital newsletter. And we look at many different metrics when it comes to trying to time the bull market peak. We look at historical cycles, we look at the diminishing returns that we're seeing here, diminishing returns across cycles. It's pretty clear that that's already happening here. And so if we're going to continue seeing diminishing returns, then there are some historical tendencies to be watching out for. And so that cyclical analysis is absolutely crucial to better time the market and understand what's realistically possible. Because as we transition into euphoria, and we're slowly already doing that, people are going to be coming up with some really crazy targets and talking about how the paradigm is going to be completely revamped. We're going to see a new paradigm, and all indicators and the 4-year cycle are going to be invalidated. I think we have to look at the data, stay level-headed, and in fact see how the data, like in the pi cycle indicator, could be front-run. Could we see some front-running? Could we see history not repeat but rhyme, where we narrowly miss the green moving average, where we narrowly see the crossover not occur? So in fact we'll see a lot of convergence in the moving average, but not actually a crossover to time that bull market peak. We talk a lot about that, looking at it level-headed, critically, examining the realistic and reasonable things that could occur when it comes to Bitcoin's price action and its cycle. So if you want to stay abreast of all my level-headed analysis, and we try to stay cutting edge to have that edge in the market, then feel free to join the Rekt Capital newsletter for free in the link in the description down below. Also, we'll be running a price increase as well. So on July 23rd, we'll be increasing our plans for the first time in quite a while. So Bitcoin's price is increasing, but we're also adding so much value to the newsletters, and we've been doing that without increasing prices for quite a while. So Bitcoin's price is going up, and so the Rekt Capital newsletter membership plans will be going up as well. So if you want to join for free, click in the link in the description down below. But if you want to join the premium, Hall of Fame, or pro or elite plans, feel free to check those out as well. But that being said, thanks so much for tuning into this video. Subscribe to the channel, like this video if you enjoy this one, and of course check out my other video, and I'll speak to you very soon.